Is it 60-40 or 70-30 or what is it?
60-40.
Yeah, don't realize. But I suggest people get it 70-30.
So here's what we say right now.
Yeah,
you
took one.
The United States are an all-time high. We weren't comfortable going much higher than that.
Because how much high, it's not gonna go up to 0.7 next year.
And if you can get a year where you can get 4 to 6% on a fixed income, so you don't retire and turn on that.
It's important not to lose money and bad. Come out better.
More defensive ratings with everything.
Hang on, don't call the meeting to order.
We don't have sound on Facebook.
Don't fix that.
Matt's working on it.
You have your work cut out for it, don't you guys? Man, another one coming Wednesday. I mean, that's what you do, but,
We'll deal with it.
yeah. You're working a lot of hours, I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's working now.
It's working now.
Well, tell them we appreciate it.
I will.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. You guys come out of both sides.
Call the special meeting of the Joint Consolidation Board to order. Roll call.
Abbott, Augenbaugh, Beers. Here. Dees.
Here.
Gelfen.
Here.
Jackson. Here. Mullica.
Here.
Whitaker. Reesinger.
Here.
Sullivan.
Here.
Please note that Mr. Achenbaugh and Mr. Abbott are on the phone.
We've already had the Pledge of Allegiance in a prior meeting. New business this evening, the reason this meeting has been called is to discuss a letter of intent with DCED and to approve the engineer technician position. We will start with a letter of intent to DCED. Ben, do you have any comment on that, or Lisa?
Sure. One of the things that's on the agenda for the city's meeting immediately following this is the 2023 audit. There were several things in the draft audit that we noted that need some work. And we do not have the staffing capacity right now in order to do all of the recommendations. And so one of the things we did immediately was reach out to the Department of Community and Economic Development and ask if they had any resources that they could bring in to help us implement some of the recommendations. And so the next step for us to officially request that is by having the city/joint board request resources from the state. So on the agenda for the special board meeting is a signed letter of intent. It's already signed by Lisa, but it doesn't go into effect until the board approves it. And so the request will be for the joint board to allow the city to move forward with requesting resources from the DCED to implement many fiscal needs. And Lisa, would you like to speak more to what those needs might be?
Yeah, we have some process improvements, and when we make those process improvements, we want to make sure that they align with the GASB standards. And so we would like to have an expert come in and make sure the things that we would like to implement are according to IRS rules for government.
So the request will be just a simple motion to authorize the city to enter into the letter of intent.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Question for Benedict. Is there any monetary value that we gotta put up, anybody?
No.
This is all free from the state, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'll second that motion.
It was
Motion by Pat, second by Bill. that we-
by Jen.
I
Jen
don't, I
seconded it.
seconded it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'll third it.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Bill.
Take the pick, Cory. Any more discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Number two for our special meeting is for the joint board to approve the engineering technician position. This will be coming out of Sandy Township's budget. But because it is a new position, it takes approval of the joint board. Any questions on that?
Could you have better Lisa enlighten what we're combining here, Mark? Just to clarify, it's actually not a new position, but we're actually just filling a position that we haven't filled with a qualified person.
Yeah, it's almost like you're downgrading the engineering position to create an engineer tech because we cannot afford to hire a PE. And so it's a new position and title and pay and such, but you're right that it's not creating more positions that cost.
The city ordinance says that we are required to have a PE. This is changing that.
Yeah.
So the duties of that position would be to conduct field surveys, to inspect construction sites, monitor and track infrastructure projects, overseeing complete reporting for Chapter 94, the DEP, EPA, SRBC, and such. Some GIS mapping, industrial sample monitoring, stormwater management program management, and several other things, perform duties as assigned. We view this position as probably coordinating with an external PE, an external engineering firm. So this person would be primarily responsible for managing all of the stuff that could be done by a non-PE and then farming out the stuff that does need to be done by an external firm. So I think that this will be a great move to save money long-term. Candidly, right now, someone on our team is an engineer who's trying to coordinate some of that, but really, we're almost overpaying because we're asking engineers to do things that we don't need an engineer to be doing, just as a matter of necessity. And so this will, I believe, save you a significant amount of money over the long term.
I'll make a motion to approve the position of engineer technician.
Second.
Been properly moved and second to approve the position of engineer technician. Any more questions or discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Well, I think we are opening this to the floor. At this time, I'd like to open the meeting to the floor for questions. If anyone has anything to bring before the Joint Consolidation Board. Not hearing any?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When it comes to this, you were talking about outsourcing to another engineering firm. How do you feel that if we're outsourcing and then having an internal, how would you justify the cost effectiveness when we can do it internally without doing so?
Okay. Anything that would be outsourced to an engineering firm would be something that required a PE, a professional engineer. This person in-house would just be an engineering tech who would be like an assistant to a PE. So the only thing that would be outsourced would be something that would require a PE's seal.
Okay, so an external source would be the PE?
Correct.
Okay, and would they be on retainer at all times, or is that something that we'd have to constantly look for?
There are a number of PEs that both the city and the township currently use. I do not believe the city has anybody on retainer, do they?
We have an agreement, but I don't think they're.
Yeah, I think we have an agreement.
Yeah, there's about 7 PE firms that we're currently working with. And as you can imagine, there's inefficiencies just based on that.
And I have one other question regarding that. Having listened to the community, I'd like to see if we could dispel some rumors right away. regarding the engineering firms, because there's rumor, Mr. Kefferlin, that your father's actually working in conjunction with the city externally. Is that through your firm, or is that independently?
No, we're taking a big loss on that.
That's not my question.
Kefferlin Strategies is the interim management firm. And because we saw the need, and he's an engineer, we've pulled him in for free and probably paid him 10 grand to do work for the city that has not been reimbursed to us.
Okay, and I appreciate that, but I think that for transparency purposes, that should have been made public, just for transparency. And then secondly, the other rumor, one of the engineering firms is Mr. Gelfand, it's your wife's firm. Is that something that you can comment on? Is it true or false?
I'm not sure I haven't heard any rumors. My wife is an architect, not an engineer, and she
Okay.
works for an architecture firm.
Okay.
They're not the same thing.
Okay, so you're dispelling that rumor. I appreciate that.
Yeah, KTH Architects is where my wife is a partner,
Okay.
and it's.
But
not-
she does work for the city as well.
I don't believe she does, KTH does.
Okay, so the firm that she works for does. Okay.
Yep.
I appreciate that. I'm just curious as to financially how that makes sense down the road. I just don't understand that, coming from a business perspective, that hiring within and having someone that's capable to do both of those things may just be most cost effective.
One person could probably not perform the same amount of work that these two people could, and he would pay a PE 3 times the amount in salary that we would pay an engineer tech.
But a firm you would not.
Well, yes, we would be paying a
Firm
firm,
would make more than if we had a PE, absolutely.
because they would have to cover overhead. I'm sure there would be profit built into that firm's invoicing.
But as quickly as DuBois is anticipating growing, I would think that that's something that would be beneficial to look at.
We are, ma'am, we are actually looking, this is on the interim basis right now that we had a tech come in. We haven't had no applicants for an engineer, but we still have to have projects signed off in the interim.
Mhm.
But we instructed our interim managers to start looking for a full-time. So when we had 2 engineers, but they both left. So.
Did they
we're
leave,
down.
or were they asked to leave?
No, they
No,
both
they
left.
left. They
They
were
got
not
better
asked.
jobs.
No, we'd love
Right,
we'd
so-
love to keep them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've
But
been
we're
extremely
gonna
lucky
look
to
at
have
it.
the PEs we've had at the salary that they were paid for such a long time. It's not easy to find a professional engineer at what the city can afford to pay. So this is a way more economical option.
It's helpful to know those things sitting from our perspective.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
These are things that we don't know unless
Mhm.
it comes forward
Yep.
in these meetings. So I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Any other comments from the floor? Nancy?
Yes, are you looking for an engineer technician or a PE?
We are currently and have been in the process of looking for an engineer because the city is required by code to have a PE. I'm pretty sure the city, I'm actually speaking for the city, but I'm pretty sure they are continuing to look for a PE.
They are considering what?
They are continuing to look for a PE, but to date,
Because they'll have
to my knowledge, they have
they'll
not
to
had an
have a PE to
applicant.
sign off on things.
Right, that's why they've been outsourcing that to one of 7 firms that we routinely use. Anything else from the floor? Motion to adjourn?
So move.
Motion by Bill,
Second.
second by Elliot. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned.
Back over here. Yeah, we're supposed to start 6:50. Yeah. Seconds.
No, I want you to, I want everybody to stay.
You want everyone to stay?
Yeah, why not?
You need to hear the audit. I really believe that too.
I mean, you won't vote, but.
Call this meeting to order. We're going to have a moment of silence for our city, our state, our country, and the world. Let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Jackson. Here. Gelfen.
Here.
Dietz.
Here.
Augenbaugh. Reesinger.
Here. I've never been in charge of a meeting that I ever said this. There was no executive session tonight. That makes me feel good. The next meeting is February 19th at 6 o'clock right here. That is a joint.
That is a joint meeting, and then immediately following, you'll have the city meetings.
We'll have the city meetings. Okay. Potential new location.
So I'd like to address this real quick, if I
Yeah.
could have a moment. There have been several complaints from residents about the acoustics of this room. There's issue with the technology, like the microphones are not picking up very adequately for the video streaming. It's often a hot room. There's not a lot of room for expansion. We've used almost every seat tonight. And so as a consequence, we started looking at other alternative places in order to meet. And the one that seems pretty clear to me, having looked at a lot of different options, is to meet at the auditorium of the Du Bois Penn State campus. It has ample room, it has a good sound system, it has potential for, it has a projector, TV and such, and enough room in order to spread out everyone. And so we are recommending that we move there. It has not been advertised yet. I don't think we would be able to make it as quick as next week. But we would like to recommend moving forward, say March onward, that we would have the public meetings there. I understand that it's changed and that it would be a little bit more complex in terms of parking and such, but I think that the meetings would be really better served in an auditorium space that is intentionally set up for this kind of a meeting. One other thing that I just wanted to address is a common complaint that people have is that they can't see the manager or the staff's faces. We could maybe find a way in that room in order to facilitate you seeing our faces. But I did want to take just a moment to explain why we were setting it up the way we were. And it's fundamentally that we are kind of entreating the legislative body. And so I feel really odd being up here as if I'm one of the voting members. And besides that, there's just the space consideration. We want everyone to be able to see their elected officials and their elected officials to see you. And like Lisa, myself, the other staff, we're not really part of that conversation. We're here to serve at the pleasure of the elected officials. And as a consequence, that's why we want to be able to see them and we want them to be able to see us. Whereas here, I'm like leaning around trying to see everyone and vice versa. So that's why we were trying to set it up the way that we did. I have an idea when we're at Penn State, if we go to Penn State, that we would kind of flank the board so that the board would all be able to see you and we would be on the sides. I think that might be a happy compromise, but just wanted to let everyone know why we were doing it the way that we're doing it. The other thing has to do with microphones. I mean, there's only that one that's trying to cover us, and the further away you get, the hard is to hear. So if Pat and Lisa, for instance, are right under the microphone, that's really helpful to be able to pick it up. So those are our reasons. I just wanted to address that head on. I'm sorry that sometimes you can't hear us or can't see our faces. And next week will probably be the same way because we'll have a full complement of board members and it's kind of impossible to fit everyone up here. So that's our reasoning. I assume that there will be some concern as to the cost of moving to Penn State. Because we can provide our own security and our law enforcement personnel, the cost is going to be only $75. I ran the numbers real quick. We spend more than $75 worth of staff time just setting up this room and lugging technology around and trying to set it up. So if we had that space where we could just walk in, plug in, and go, it would actually probably save us in some sense. So thanks for that special announcement. The other thing that I wanted to mention real quick while we're on announcements is that in the past, financial institutions have been supplied with by their tax collector with the tax bills. So they'll go directly to your lending institution. Effective this year, we're going to have to send all the real estate tax bills directly to the property owner. We will still try, when we have something on record, to send that digitally to the lending institution to make sure that, if you have an escrow account set up to pay your property taxes, that it will still go through that way. But we really need the onus to be on the property owner to ensure that your property tax bill is paid. And whether that's you personally or you're sending it on to an escrow account, that's your business. We can't be in the business of deciding that. And so as a consequence, that process has changed. The tax collection times have also somewhat changed. It's now Monday through Thursday, 9 to 3. That's not to say that if you went to the city building, we wouldn't be able to take a payment some other time. But that's kind of the only time of the day that we're guaranteeing. It's Monday through Thursday, 9 to 3. And that does mean that Fridays we're not guaranteeing that someone will be there. And that's because of that 10-hour workday thing. It turned out to be a little bit more cumbersome to administrate, I suppose. Again, I'm not saying that if you went there, you wouldn't be able to pay. I'm just saying that we can't guarantee it like we can 9 to 3, Monday through Thursday. Any questions?
Will that location change?
Thank you. Good catch. Due to the construction at the city building, the payment, if you go in person and pay, it will actually be at the building across the street now. So you'll still actually park in the same, you park in the parking lot and or potentially go up to the bank, vacuum thing.
Old S&T Bank
Yeah.
building.
And
The old drive-through.
Yeah, go through the drive-through to pay your taxes. So we think that should be more convenient for many residents. So we don't know exactly what days that's going to happen because we haven't figured out what day we'll be moving over to the bank. We haven't figured out the days that the construction of the new building is going to force that to happen. So I don't know exactly, but what you can know is that you'll still go to the same parking lot. The question will just be whether you're crossing the street to go to the existing city building or you go to the old S&T Bank building that's right there in the same complex. Either way, mailing is still best or paying online. So, thank you.
Public comments on agenda items. Again, one comment per person and about 5 minutes. Okay, go ahead.
Kristen Vida, Du Bois.
Could you stand for us, Kristen?
sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, regarding the 2023 audit presentation, if you could just touch base a little bit on, is this a forensic audit? Or is this your normal annual audit? If you can talk about the differences between the two as to how one audit can catch theft and the other cannot, or as harder to maybe?
Sure. So I'm Mike Lamb. I'm with Wessel and Company, here to present the audit results. So the audit that we're going to look at tonight is your annual financial statement audit. It is not a forensic audit. So there is a difference. So a forensic audit is much more detailed. into certain areas where there is believed to be, misappropriation. That is not the purpose of our audit. So the purpose of our audit is to look at the city's financial statements and to issue an opinion on whether or not we feel that those financial statements are free of material misstatements. So that's what we'll look at tonight.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Linda Clark, Ream Street. I do have a question about the prohibited parking on West Scribner. I know that when I looked up the Council Bill 1990 about the engineer, Mr. Gelfand had introduced that. I'd like to know who introduced or requested the ordinance and what's the rationale behind that ordinance?
I'm sorry, which one are you talking about,
The
though?
parking on West Scribner and Stockdale, actually.
Well, actually, it would be most appropriate to take the public comment and then call on the appropriate person during the meeting.
Okay.
So,
Okay, well, I still have more questions.
go ahead.
then. I'd like to know, were the residents notified of the potential to be changed so that they had a chance to question it or be here? I have concerns that there are churches that utilize that parking on Sundays. There's 3 churches, actually, that may have to use that parking because it's limited parking. There have been numerous times it's mentioned here in the council meetings by council members that there's not enough parking in the city, so we're taking parking away, and that's a concern. So there's some rationales that just don't make sense to me. I'd like to address that. But most importantly, for transparency purposes, who's going to enforce that? Because we know that Councilmember Jackson and her husband and her brother park without feeding meters. We know that Mr. Gelfand parks in right-of-ways, and he has a 2-car garage, but he blocks sidewalks. So who's going to start the enforcement of these things when we don't even have council members that follow the ordinances themselves? I think that's a really important aspect of it. And then the last thing I'll bring up, because I do think it's important for the citizens to know. West Scribner has very few houses, but 32 West Scribner, 34 West Scribner, 3840 West Scribner, and 17 North High Street, which is sometimes noted as 101 West Scribner, is all owned by Councilwoman Jackson or partially owned by Councilwoman Jackson. I think that that needs to be noted, and I think it's very, very important we know the reason.
We'll answer those at the end. Any other comments on agenda items? Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda.
The minutes are in your packet. If you'd like them to be read to you, I'm happy to read them, or if you'd like to dispense with the meeting minutes, then we can move on to the auto bills, the bills and the auto drafts, which are also in your packets. And if there's no questions, then I believe you could take a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Anybody have a motion on that?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Properly moved in second. Any questions on any of those, the bills or anything? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Carries.
And make one quick comment.
Mhm.
I forgot to say, there was some question as to why the bills weren't on the initial agenda. And the reason is simply that the admin system, I think it was the admin system, when it exported the file, it corrupted it and it wasn't readable as the PDF that it was intended to be. And so I had to work on it on Saturday in order to get it fixed. And then I did post it within the 24 hours, so it was certainly legal, but I know that there was some question as to why it was a technical error.
We're going to move on to special presentations. Bill Fontana. Hi, Bill. And he's going to present Keystone Core, and he will tell you all about it, which is going to be very helpful.
I didn't know if I was going to make it. I thought that the meeting was still at City Hall, so I've been running around for the last 15 minutes.
Nice.
Sort of pass those out. So, thank you very much for having me here this evening. For everybody else's edification, Keystone Core Services is a subsidiary of the Pennsylvania Downtown Center, Harrisburg-based nonprofit organization that deals with community revitalization issues. And last summer, at our conference in York, some representatives from the city of Du Bois were there, and we talked about a service that we provide. It's called Blighted Property Inventory. And we came up and we had a conversation with code enforcement officer, the mayor, council people, a gentleman from the Redevelopment Authority, the manager of Downtown Du Bois Inc. And what we decided would be a good thing for that's my phone ringing for everybody to do would be for Keystone Core Services to do a blighted property inventory of properties along North and South Brady and East Park, which are two of the primary corridors coming into town, and to evaluate the properties that over the last couple of years had been issued significant code violations on those properties. There were a total of 27 properties originally. I think we ended up evaluating 28 properties and 29 structures. There's actually one parcel that has two houses on the same parcel. And the purpose of the inventory, and this was not a detailed kind of code enforcement inspection, and just let me say that I think you have a great code enforcement officer here. I think he does a really good job. He's been very responsive to everything we asked for during this process. And the idea was to look at these two major corridors into town and to try to get sort of a prioritization as to which properties along those two corridors had the greatest opportunity to be dealt with in some form by either the city or another nonprofit organization. This city currently uses the 2018 version of the International Property Maintenance Code, so we used that document. We used the criteria established by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania under the Conservatorship Act, and we also looked at criteria established by the Pennsylvania Drug Nuisance Law. We rated, and these were all what we call windshield surveys. We didn't go into any structure. We didn't enter upon any property for legal reasons. And from the sidewalk, we evaluate the properties on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being a property that really doesn't need much work at all. A property that gets a rating of 4 means that there's some minor work that needs to be done, probably the kind of work that could be done by the owner. A rating of 3 means that a property has some minor rehab work that would probably require a contractor. 2 is a property that probably has significant work needed and probably going to be more than $2,500 worth of rehab work that needs to be done. And then finally, a 5 or a 1 would be properties that are probably close to the point where rehab would be in excess of half of the current value of the property. And in most cases, that's a good indication of the need for demolition. So we started the process with Zach came along, and we came up here in November of last year and evaluated all the properties that were on the list. You have a map on the back that indicates the properties that we took a look at. We extracted information from the Clearfield County GIS systems. We were given tax information by the City of Du Bois treasurer, and we were provided information by through Zach from the police department. Properties were evaluated in 4 areas: the condition of the exterior yard, which is part of the property maintenance code, the condition of the primary structure on that property, a storefront if applicable, and there's no specific storefront criteria, so we use criteria that have been established by the Pennsylvania Downtown Center, and then finally the overall condition of the property. There were approximately 150 parcels in total in the study area. 95 of them were on North and South Brady, and 55 were on East Park. There were 28 properties and 29 structures, as I mentioned, that had previous code violations, and those are the ones that we looked at. 82% of the properties were investment structures, meaning they were not owner-occupied. They were owned by people who lived elsewhere, or didn't live in that particular structure. 5 parcels were owner-occupied, and of the other 24, 12 were located within the city of Du Bois, 8 were located in other parts of Pennsylvania, and 4 are located out of state. Now, if you look at the chart at the bottom of the page that I gave you, you'll see sort of a ranking system there. The average property in those 2 corridors scored a 3.34, which means it was someplace between fair and work that the homeowner could do, or in need of a minor contractor. That number, however, is skewed by the fact that the exterior of the properties were actually in pretty good condition. There wasn't a lot of trash, there wasn't a lot of garbage strewn around, there wasn't a lot of graffiti and all that sort of stuff. So the fact that the exterior scores were fairly high raises the overall score. But when you go to look at the structural score, the average structure scored just about a 3, and the low was 1.6, which means that there are some properties in there that are in pretty significant states of deterioration, and 5 of them were below a score of 2.5. So in looking at this, what we were able to pass along and talk to Zach a little bit about is the fact that there are 5 properties that technically qualify for the Conservatorship Act in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, but one of those the Redevelopment Authority already owns, so you wouldn't want to deal with that one. There are 4 other properties that would theoretically fall within the ability of the either a nonprofit organization, city government, county government, land bank, whatever, to take the property through the conservatorship process in Pennsylvania. Essentially what that does is say that a property has to meet 4 criteria. It has to be vacant, it can't be in foreclosure, it can't have been effectively marketed for at least a year, tax delinquencies, all those sorts of things. And what that allows an interested party to do is to go to common pleas court and ask that the court put the property in the possession of the conservator so that that property can either be stabilized or something done with it, while the property owner doesn't change hands. The property owner is then given a time frame in which it has to mitigate any problems with the property. And if they don't, then the property can actually, you know, at the extreme, the property owner can say, hey, we don't want to do anything with it, we'll give it to the conservator. However, if the property owner says, I will do something, then any expenses incurred by the conservator during the conservatorship have to be reimbursed to the conservator by the property owner in addition to whatever improvements they have to make. So there are 4 properties there. 3 of them are on South Brady. The one up at the far end of East Park, I'm sure you're probably all aware of that one.
Can you give us the addresses?
Yeah, 205 East Park is the one, and then I think they're at the bottom there, the thing. 133 South Brady.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, 229, 231 South Brady, and 219 South Brady. Most of those are those properties that sit up on the high side that are abandoned. The windows are broken, the porches are falling apart, the steps are in really bad shape. So that's, I mean, you'll get a full report. This is simply a 1-page executive summary for tonight. You'll get a 50-page report, plus or minus, with all of those details. But now that you have a rank ordering, and the good thing about this is it doesn't put anybody in the position of saying, well, you arbitrarily chose my property to pick on, right? This is an objective evaluation of properties in those 2 corridors that have a negative impact on the community. And just let me say that, you know, those kind of blighted properties, if you dig into the literature a little bit, you'll find that those properties that are sitting there abandoned, vacant, can actually decrease the property value of every property within 500 feet by about $3,500. So when you start putting 3 of them together, you know, and expanding that area, it does have a significant impact on the tax base, on the appeal of the neighborhood for people who may want to buy property, and all those sorts of things. So the next step in the process, once we get you the final report, will be for City Council and/or Downtown Du Bois Inc. or some other organization within the region to decide if in fact it wants to move forward on any of those properties to try to address the blighting influences that are a problem right now. So we just wanted to give you that bit of a summary, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. I'll answer them from anybody. Yes?
I have a question.
Yes.
How does that affect the sidewalk and the walls that are crumbling in front of some of those properties?
Is that the walls, or the walls public?
The walls are the property owner's responsibility, not the one down along the roadway, but along the sidewalk. Those are all property owner's responsibilities. So that was evaluated too in this walkthrough.
Okay.
So, there is a program that, one of the good things at the Department of Community and Economic Development this year is that a lot of the programs that fund these kind of rehabilitation projects have all been increased pretty substantially. So the Commonwealth, I'm sure you've all heard of the Main Street program. The Commonwealth also has a problem called the Elm Street program, which is sort of like Main Street taken into a residential area. So depending on how you wanted to draw the boundaries, you could actually get a planning grant of up to $25,000, which would have to be matched locally. It doesn't necessarily have to be by city government, but have to be matched, to prepare a kind of a revitalization plan for those neighborhoods, if you wanted to do that. And then once you do that, then you can move into actual funding for things like housing rehabilitation costs, public space improvements, sidewalk improvements, those sorts of things. And it's a good time to think about that. So the next step in the process will be for the city, maybe with input from Downtown Du Bois Inc., to decide how they may want to move forward. Okay? All right.
Questions?
It's a 2-hour ride up and back where I came from, so I'll be happy to answer questions. So, okay.
Who would act as conservator? I mean, how does that,
Any,
how's that
well,
handled?
whoever, it can be the city, it could be Downtown Du Bois Inc., it can be any nonprofit, any governmental entity. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be, it could be a church, you know, it could be a church that wanted to do, it could be one of the fire, companies, could be the conservator, as long as it's a nonprofit or a governmental entity. Okay. And I think it's not something that there is a great deal of legal expertise in every community, and I don't know whether or not your solicitor has expertise in this area. I do know that there is a solicitor, a company in Franklin that has done a number of these. So, I mean, there is some expertise in the area if, you know, they would want to partner with your solicitor.
And did you look at ones with just code violations?
Yes,
and
that
drug-
was
and drug
all we were
violations?
asked to do, was to look at the ones with code violations. Most of them had some significant violations. There were a couple of them that, you know, Zach and I talked about that were kind of minor sort of things, but we still took a look at them, we still evaluated them, but they weren't overwhelming problems. Okay? I'll be in touch.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
I have one question.
Sure.
The county,
Yeah.
don't they have a program conservancy?
I don't know if they have a conservatorship program. The county has a land bank, right? Do they have a land
Yes.
bank? They have a land bank.
Something, I don't
Yeah.
know which one, what they
Yeah.
call it.
Yeah.
But, you know, they have more resources than we do.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Find a
up.
way to, you know, partner with them.
Yeah, well, and that happens quite often. So, you also have a redevelopment authority here, correct? I mean, a city redevelopment authority. So there's any number of ways you can move forward on that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next is pension, 2024 pension performance by C.S. McKee. Gentlemen?
All right. Thank you, everybody. My name is Zach Vigneault. I'm a client services manager here at CS McKee, and we're very excited to be here today. This is our first time in Du Bois as the official investment advisor for the police and non-uniform pension plan. So thank you so much for having us. Ben and Lisa, and also Sean, Terry Bracken, among others. It's just been a pleasure to work with them over the last few months to get the accounts over, get the assets in the new accounts invested. It's only been a short period of time. It was completed around in the beginning of December. But you know, things are going smoothly. Typically, we will give a more robust
Yeah, how did we do
update.
last year?
Yeah, it was a pretty volatile December. But for today's purposes, what we wanted to do was really just give you a background and an overview of CS McKee as a firm. We're going to be here quite a bit, so we figured we might as well just make sure everybody's on the same page about what we do, who we are, where we're from. But CS McKee, we're based in Pittsburgh, so we're doing our favorite thing, serving communities in Western Pennsylvania. Hopefully a lot of Steelers fans here. We'll always appreciate that. But we've actually been doing this since 1972. It's the core of our business. It still holds true today. We now have accounts across the country, but Pennsylvania is our home, and that's still where the majority of our clients are. As of today, we have over 70 governmental accounts across the state. So we're very familiar with this area as well. Even before partnering with Du Bois, we're here in the general vicinity about once a quarter, sometimes twice. So feel free to call us whenever. We'd be happy to take the call. We'd be happy to come meet you in person if it's needed. Whatever's best for you all, especially early on in this transition, we all get on the same page there. So the other thing I wanted to call out, so I'll be here for most meetings or whenever we're called, whatever the best way to deliver the quarterly updates once we have a full quarter of performance. Provide you economic updates, market outlooks, whatever it may be. Shane is my colleague here. He's another client services manager. He'll be here. And we also brought Jason Petner. So Jason is one of our 14 investment professionals at CS McKee. So that's something we're really proud of. We have 14 full-time investors underneath our roof. And when you think about doing what we do, we have a lot of investment capabilities within our walls. It's not only competitive for the state of Pennsylvania, the western side of the state, it's very competitive from a national level. And you've seen that, Shane especially, he's on planes every week traveling. So we still call this home, but we've built something what we think is pretty special, and we're honored to be partnered here at Du Bois. With that said, we bring Jason not only because he's a great investor, and his leaders on his team have been together for the same senior portfolio management team for over 26 years, all at CS McKee. So a lot of experience within that same roof, crafting our process, but also understanding the needs of pension plans across the state. But I like to bring Jason because he can answer to the best of our abilities what our outlooks of the markets are, economy, all the hard questions. So we bring him. We'd just like to open it up to everybody. If they have any questions about the transition over the last few months, what we do at CS McKee in more detail, or if any positioning of the portfolio, how we've invested it, we have Jason here as well.
What's your investment strategy for Du Bois?
Yeah, absolutely. So for
Stand up.
So for Du Bois, between the two pension plans, we have in general a 60-40 portfolio, meaning 60% related to equities or stocks and 40% related to fixed income. Now, given the funding status difference between the two funds, the fixed income looks slightly different, with the one with a little bit lower funding status having a little bit higher octane, looking for a little bit higher yield. That being said, the investment strategies underneath the hood, we try to find a diversified portfolio. That being said, if one stock isn't going to drive the entire portfolio down, we try to keep it globally diversified and really look for names that we think are good value. So for example, if you're going out looking for a car, we're not going to overpay for something that has maybe been in a Kelly Blue Book accident. We're looking underneath the hood, trying to find names that we enjoy, both from the fixed income, which is the bond side, and also the equity. So our goal is to be long-term partners with you, really taking a look beyond, obviously everything in the news tends to make the markets volatile, but our goal is to look beyond that because this partnership lasts well beyond us. Pension plans are supposed to last well beyond us, and we take that same exact view with a long-term perspective, really enjoying the companies, because at the end of the day on the stock side, while you might hear a lot of volatility in the news, we're trying to buy companies, right? Just as if any of you are small business owners, you want to grow that business, and so too do we want to find companies that we really trust and can grow with. So that really stands true for both the fixed income, which is the bond side, and the equity side, but we try to create a nicely diversified portfolio for you so that if we have one volatile day of news, you're not going to feel the pain that single day. So our goal is to continue to take that long-term perspective so that we can weather the daily news headlines and try to be with you for the long haul.
One of the things that I would mention as well is what we do, the first step when we're taking a look at pension plans like yours, we want to take a look at your actuarial rates of assumption. And then we want to work very closely with you and your actuary to determine, is that a realistic number? Is that something that needs to be altered? And then from there, what we're trying to do is we're trying to build out an asset allocation that will allow you to consistently meet or exceed that actuarial rate of assumption while minimizing risk and minimizing volatility. It's one of the things that both Zach and Jason mentioned. We're very conservative in how we manage the money. We're not going to take excessive risk with the portfolio. And as Jason said, we're trying to identify those companies that should even be able to continue to grow even when the economies do slow. So it's very important for us.
Our rate of assumption is 8%. Give me your thoughts on that.
So if you look on it, especially based on across the country, that's definitely high. I would say that the national average is closer to 7%. Now I know a lot of the municipalities and public entities that keep it at that level. One of the reasons why they're at that level is because it's very expensive to move it lower. So one of the things that we'd be happy to work with.
But is it at some point you're going to need to pay.
Yeah. That's a great point with it, because if your actuarial rate of assumption is too high, what you're doing is you're understating your current risks and your current liabilities. On the flip side, if it's too low, you're going to overstate your current risks and liabilities, and you're putting more of a burden on current taxpayers. On the flip side, if it's too high, you're putting a significant burden on future taxpayers. So it's very important to work with your actuary and your investment manager to get what a realistic number is. Now, one of the things we think that you did that was very good with the decision that you made, each of the core responsibilities of your pension plan are handled by separate non-affiliated entities. So what does that do? That gives you additional checks and balances, eyes on the plan, and that's gonna give you different opinions amongst your service providers that you have.
How would you move us towards that 7?
I think one of the things would bring the actuary in, so Mockenhop is the actuary now for both plans. Obviously, if you made a big move from 8 to 7%, that'd be a significant burden for the city. So one of the things that I would do is to get a plan into place where you gradually lower that actuarial assumption.
At what pace?
So one of the things is I don't have the entire picture of what the city can afford. And here's the one thing. We just had back-to-back years where the S&P 500 had over a 20% return. That's the first time that's happened since 1998. So as bad as 2022 was when both stocks and bonds were down, we just had 2 really strong years. Now's the time to take a look at something like that when you're in a position of strength, to be able to take a look at moving those. And a lot of it also depends on what your mortality rates are, and different assumptions that the actuarial can.
When are we gonna get our next actuary report?
That should be.
Should be this year, because I think it's every other year, am I correct?
Exactly. And they have a smoothing that's in place, so if you do get a bad year like 2022, it isn't as bad.
Okay.
One of the things too with the next time we're here, the next time Mockenhop does come, it will probably be together, or we hope to at least. So we might have more details on that as well.
Because it's a long-term obligation that needs to be made.
That's exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Anybody have any questions?
What I can tell you.
Anybody from the city that works for the city? I mean, it's your future.
What I can tell you on behalf of our entire team at CS McKee, we want to thank you for the opportunity to work with the city. It's an absolute pleasure. And as Jason, or as Zach said, you have access to every single one of our employees at CS McKee. Whether it's our chief investment officer, our chief operating officer, whoever it might be, everyone is available to you. Just a phone call or a short drive away.
Questions, anybody? Okay, thank you, Jen.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Mike, you're up. Audit 2023 audit presentation. 23, Chief.
All right, thank you. So yes, we're here tonight to review the audit presentation for the 2023 fiscal year. So I realize right now we're sitting in 2025. So we've got to go back, 2 years in terms of looking at the actual results. Everyone up front should have gotten a thicker packet. Just inside the front cover is what I have shown on screen, which is the agenda. Just like others, trying to boil a lot of information down to what we feel is important. Certainly can go through questions throughout the presentation. So as was mentioned with the question from the audience, our audit is on the financial statements for the city for 2023. And the first, up at the top here, you can see in the audit report in terms of opinions. So as auditors, we're hired to give that opinion on whether the financial statements are free of material misstatement. We do have, you can see there under the reporting entity, that we had to issue an adverse opinion. What that means is we didn't have all of the information to be able to report on the city as a whole. And when I say that, it's including not only just the city, but you have what are called component units. Those are other governmental units that operate on their own, but under the GASB standards, as Lisa had mentioned earlier, those would need to be pulled under the umbrella of this audit. So those would be, I believe the library is a component unit, the redevelopment authority, the hospital authority, and then there's one other authority that would be included. That's not been included in your audits in the past, and we were not engaged to audit those entities. So that's why we have to issue that opinion. You can see for the governmental activities, this would be looking at your general fund, your liquid fuels fund, all of your governmental funds under one umbrella. We issued an unmodified opinion, and what that means is that that is the highest level of assurance that we can give as auditors, that the financial statements for those funds are free of material misstatements. Your business type activities would be your water and sewer funds. Again, we had an unmodified opinion there. The major fund for the city is only the general fund, so that is an unmodified opinion. And then the aggregate remaining funds would be all of the remaining funds that are included as part of the audit. So we were able to issue an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion on the financial statements for those funds and those business activities. There are a couple modifications in our report that I did want to point out. They did not affect the opinions that we issued. One was just that you do currently report on the modified cash basis of accounting. So that is a little bit different than, say, the county, who operates on a modified accrual and then also on a full accrual. Certainly that's something, as you progress forward, that's something that I believe you could move to in the future.
Could or should?
I would say that should be a goal to move towards that, because you would be consistent then in terms of your other governmental entities around you that do report on the GASB standards. Another item that we point out for the reader in the report is we did have a prior period adjustment. So as a part of the audit, we did have to record cash accounts that had previously not been recorded in the accounting system or on the general ledger. So we made a note of that. We also have a footnote in our report that details out what those items were. And then the third item is the omission of a management discussion and analysis. That is, again, something that is required by GASB, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. And all that is an executive summary that would precede the financial statements in your report. Again, it did not affect our opinion in terms of what we issued. We're just pointing out that that piece of information normally required by governmental accounting standards is not incorporated. That is something, again, that if you would want to do that in the future, that is something that we could work with management to include that executive summary as part of the audit. Any questions to this point? Okay. Just scrolling down here, looking, again, this is very, very high level in terms of the overall government-wide financial statements. Total assets for 2023 for the governmental funds was $4.3 million. You can see that it was at 8.3, just under 8.3 in the prior year. For the business type activities, again, that's your water and sewer funds. You finished the year at $307,000 compared to $28,000 in the prior year. Just below that, you'll see the total revenue and expenses. For governmental activities, you can see there was a loss in the current year of $3.9 million within the general fund. Part of that is due to reporting on the modified cash basis. So, the modified cash basis basically looks at when receipts come in, when the checks go out, and they don't necessarily differentiate between what year they might relate to. And that's where, if you would move to the modified accrual basis, you would look to capture all of your 2023 revenue and expenses in 2023. Anything that's outside that period, would be moved to the proper period. For the business type activities, you can see total revenue of $46 million with total expenses of $45, which resulted in a surplus there of $276,000. You can see the significant increase specifically with the business type activities from 23 to 22. That is related to the Penvest project. So there was $36 million worth of activity for the Penvest project that is flowing through the sewer fund in 2023, and we'll see that again in 2024. just to sort of accompany the agenda here, we did put together just some charts and graphs to give you a little more detailed information. So this gives you some perspective over the last 4 years of, really your 3 core funds in terms of operating is your general fund and then your water and sewer funds. And so this is showing the fund operations over those last 4 years. And you can see the general fund at the end of 2023, there was a $4.3 million deficit. You can see the water fund surplus of $223,000 and the sewer fund of $53,000. A lot of this is due, and you'll see it on the graphs, a lot of this is due to large grant revenue, grants that have come in prior years. So they would have been captured as revenue in prior years, but they wouldn't have been spent until last year or this year. So again, that's where on the cash basis, you're sort of seeing those bigger swings, where on the modified accrual, you would only recognize revenue to the point that you had expenses, so that they would always offset. So you'll see that here in some of the graphs. Again, just looking over the 4-year, you can see 2020 and 2021 receiving those large grants, and then spending down those grant funds in 22 and in 23. And again, we only audited 2023, so we utilized the audit reports from prior years to help pull together some of this information, and it's certainly something as we continue to assist the city, we'll continue to build on this so that we have some history to look at. Looking at your fund balance among these different funds, you can see, I know that is a little bit small, for 2023, the general fund had a fund balance of $3.7 million. So that's the difference between your assets and your liabilities. The water fund at $227,000 and the sewer fund. I did want to point out again, just for 2023, part of that fund balance does include balances from the cash and investment accounts that we had to add. That was about $2.1 million that was added to the books at the end of 2023. So I just wanted to include that. Yeah, and so the ending balance cash was 1.6. The 2.1 was what we had to put on as of January 1, but at 12/31, it was at 1.6 million.
What do you mean it needed put in there?
So previously, these accounts were not recorded in the general ledger for the city. So these are accounts that were in your EIN number. So we worked with management, we worked with the banks. A lot of these were related to the fire department, and we appreciate their cooperation, and being able to work with them to get the information to include these. Now those balances and the revenue and expenses, that's reflected here. And we'll talk about, we did have some recommendations related to this in our management letter that we'll go through in a little bit. So again, just looking over the last few years in terms of your fund balance for these 3 funds combined, you can see again, because of the significant revenue swing in 2021, you can see your fund balance jumps from $3.5 million up to $9 million. And then you've been spending down that fund balance over the last couple of years on various capital projects. Here again, this is looking specifically just at the general fund. So you can see it looks at your tax revenue, your grant revenue is the second group, charge for service, license permits, and some other areas. You can see the tax revenue has been relatively stable. Or increasing year over year. When you look at the grants, again, I keep going back to that, but you can see the swing in the grant funding in 2021. And then as you have spent down those funds, also all of the CARES money, all of the ARPA money, that is all fully spent at this point, or would be fully spent, even into 2024. The charges for service, the reason that graph looks out of whack, or out of the ordinary, would be there was about $2 million that had been transferred from sewer into water. And there are reasons why transfers would occur, but there was a balance left in the general fund of about $2 million. So that is something that I did want to work with the management team to look at further to see, if that money should stay within the general fund or if that money should, eventually move back to the sewer fund. This just looks at your overall sewer fund revenue over the last 4 years. You can see there are some changes, but really in looking at this, I would say it's probably due to timing of just the collection of your billings within the office. And then on the revenue for the water fund, you can see again, 3.4 million in 2020, just under 3.8 million in 2023. In terms of your expenses and where are the expenses going, looking at it from a pie perspective, you can see the dark blue there, the 3.9 million is your general government expense. I'm sorry, the general government is the light blue, the 2.1. So sort of working across. Public safety is the maroon color. You can just see sort of by department and by their function and the services that they're delivering to the taxpayers, where the dollars are being spent. So the total expenses were 16.7. And one thing, again, just to point out, you can see the orange was the capital expenditure. So there was a lot of money spent on capital projects in 2023. So that's why you see it as a really large chunk of the pie. And then you can see the 3.9 million is actually your debt service. So those were the total debt service payments that were paid out of the general fund. And a large chunk of that was due to a loan that had been taken out, I think as a bridge loan, and had been repaid in full, and that was 3.5 million. So just wanted to point that out. This next pie chart looks at the same total of expenses. This was a recommendation just from Lisa and Ben in terms of looking at where are the dollars going, from an expense standpoint by object. So that sort of 25% there, the 4.1 million, that's your salary and fringe benefits. So 25% of your budget is going towards your salary and fringe benefits. You can see 3.9 million, again, going to debt service. The 3.3 for capital expenses. So almost 2/3 of the expenses for 2023 are in salary and fringe, debt service, and capital projects. And then you get into some of the other categories, in those smaller slices of the pie. To hop back to the agenda, in the very back of your booklet, there is a letter that is required for us as auditors to provide to you, those that are charged with governance. This is required by our professional standards. It goes through the timing of the audit. It talks about what our role is as auditors in terms of audit adjustments. The one thing that was modified or unique for this particular audit, we did have significant difficulties during the audit, and a lot of that was driven by turnover. Just in terms of a lot of the people that we needed to talk to for 2023 weren't there when we were there to do the audit. So that's why we're here in February. Ideally, we would be here, in June, July, to be able to present on the prior year audit. So, that obviously the turnover and not being able to maybe find information as quickly, leads to delays. Again, I think it was September when we had we came across the accounts for the fire department. And again, thanks to everyone that was involved there just to, help gather, that had never been gathered before and included as part of the audit. So that took some time reaching out to everybody, getting all of that incorporated, getting it recorded. So it really was a team effort from the current staff that you have in place, to really dig that information out and make sure that we could, issue the final report. Item number 4 is our single audit report. We did finish that back at the end of September, and those are the smaller booklets. So this is your federal compliance audit. So in addition to your financial statement audit, you are required to have a federal compliance audit of your federal funds. And so in 2023, you had total federal expenditures of $2.9 million compared to 1.1 in the prior year. The two programs that we looked at from a federal compliance standpoint, one was the Coronavirus State and Local Fiscal Relief Fund, or the ARPA funds, under 21027. We did not have any findings related to the compliance requirements for that program. And then the second program there, which was the larger of the two, was the PennVest. So a portion of your PennVest project money is federal, and so that gets reported on your single audit. We do some additional testing related to those compliance requirements. Overall, we looked at 2.3 million of the total 2.9 for the city. So that was 87% coverage. So that will satisfy the granting agencies that we conducted our audit within the federal guidelines under uniform guidance. We did have 2 findings that we noted in our compliance audit. So one was related to material year-end journal entries. So as a part of the audit, there were journal entries that needed to be recorded in Edmonds in order for our records or our audit to agree to the city's financial statements. So this just summarizes those. Those are attached in detail to your communication letter that we previously discussed. But you can see we had 15 adjustments within the general fund, totaling 10.9 million in terms of total value. And then you can see the adjustments there for the other funds as well. So the second finding is related to financial statement preparation. Unfortunately, GASB and the standard setters, they don't look at the city of DuBois any differently than they do at a Fortune 500 company. Our standards basically require you, when we walk in the door, that you say, here's our financial statements and our note disclosures. We need you to give an opinion, okay? So this does not happen with a lot of our government and nonprofits. So these 2 findings are something that we have a lot in terms of issuing to our clients, because they don't have the staff to be able to hand this to us on day 1 of the audit. They don't have the staff to book all the journal entries that need to be booked prior to the audit. So this is something that we do see. We also talked, Lisa, Terry, and I, and Kara, who's not with me tonight, are my manager. There are some things that we can do on the adjustments to try and cut that down, hopefully in future periods. So I mean, ultimately, I think that's, we always want to try and work towards no findings, and maybe we can get to a point here down the road that we can eliminate these findings entirely. But that's something that we would certainly work with management on. The last primary item here is just a section that I call operational recommendations. So this is also included in the back of the book, and you'll see it. It's about an 8-page letter that goes into more detail. But these are essentially recommendations that as we were doing the audit, and as we were concluding everything and meeting with Lisa and Terry to talk through what can be changed, what can be done to improve the internal controls, what can be done to improve, our reporting, to you all and to the public. So these are recommendations, again, that we came up with, in terms of just looking at the cash receipts, I believe that there's probably some efficiencies that you could gain within the Edmunds accounting software. And that would be just working with the treasurer's office and finance to fine tune some of those areas that could be improved to record everything in Edmunds. It relates to the next one, which would be the coding sheets. There are certain items that the treasurer's office doesn't record into Edmunds, but they send it to finance and finance records it. There's probably just better sort of streamlining that could be done there. So we talked through that. Billing adjustments, this would be, coming up with a formal policy on, how to handle billing adjustments. Sometimes there's reasons that those adjustments would occur. I think it's just sort of defining what those adjustments would be and having a process in place that ultimately management would be able to review and approve those as a part of the billing process that's ongoing. Under cash disbursements, unclaimed properties, so if you have outstanding checks that are greater than 5 years, there is a process through the Department of Revenue that you can turn that money back into the state. The state will then, they have a program that will work on, posting that and making that publicly available for people. So there were checks that were much older than 5 years, so we do recommend going through that process. Something else in looking at the cash disbursements, I think this one was specific to, again, the turnover. There was an invoice approval sheet that probably had 6, 7, maybe 8 signatures to get something approved. That's pretty inefficient. So again, that's something that I think is, as you merge with Sandy Township, as you're looking to revamp and streamline your processes, it would be looking to find, what those different approval levels look like, so that it can efficiently get through the system and you can pay your vendors. Under payroll, there were certain things in the personnel files, just from an audit standpoint, related to, say, maybe raises or job, what their job title was, things that you would expect to find that weren't included, or maybe were outdated. So I think there's, some work that could be done just to, look at the files, work with someone to identify what is required from a legal standpoint, from a compliance standpoint, so that all those required documents are there for the employees. The workflow of timesheets, again, this is something that I think could be improved and streamlined, whether it's utilizing Edmunds or looking at another HR solution just to sort of move the timesheets through to, from the employee to the department head to, finance for payment. Under the general ledger accounting system, the chart of accounts, and I understand that the PA Economy League is working with the city to revamp the chart of accounts, and I think that is fantastic because I think it is absolutely needed, and I think there's a lot of benefit that will come out of that. So we do have, just that recommendation in there, and we support that effort in terms of, revitalizing the chart of accounts, making sure that it complies. DCD has a guide that they publish to allow all municipalities to sort of follow that format. So even though they put it out there, over time, accounts get added, projects become inactive, and so you end up with a lot more accounts in your structure than you need. Fund reporting, currently the pension funds, there's a custodial fund and then there are 2 escrow accounts. Those are currently not recorded in the general ledger. So we were able to get the information needed to reflect them in the financial statements. We're just encouraging you to make sure that that information gets into the general ledger so that it can be reconciled, just like any other bank or investment account. The bank reconciliations currently are not, in 2023, they were not being performed in the system. I know that Terry is working on now utilizing the system to complete those monthly bank reconciliations. And that's really important to try and use the system as much as possible and not rely so much on outside spreadsheets and other tools we want to try and maximize the use of that system that you're paying for. Some other recommendations, this group here relates to the annual budgets. The budget document that we had just had high level, sort of by department, for the general fund. Again, as we looked at, the water and sewer fund, we would recommend also probably incorporating that into your budget process, and it may be incorporated, it just might not have been apparent to us. And the same thing with, the line item detail, making sure that the budgeted lines match up with your accounting software. Again, just so that throughout the year, as you're getting reports, you can see, what you budgeted, what you approved at the beginning of the year, where you stand from an actual standpoint, and if any modifications would need to be made. There were some, again, looking at departments as a whole, there were some departments that were over budget, and there may be reasons for that. So, again, look to utilize your accounting system to maybe restrict, purchases beyond the budget. Financial projections, this is something that our firm is a big advocate for our governments. I know a lot of the focus is on looking at your annual budget, and certainly that is important, but we're a huge advocate of trying to look out 1, 2, maybe 3 other years as a part of that process so that you can, understand not only trying to balance today's budget, but also how those decisions impact future periods. And sort of tied to that is looking at maybe developing a fund balance policy. I've had some success with some school district clients. Again, they're set up following GASB and following, fund accounting, and utilizing the policies and procedures within that fund balance policy to help guide the decision making in terms of wanting to retain a healthy level of fund balance. Also knowing that, you may need to use fund balance for a given year. You may not be able to raise taxes or, fill a hole. So you may need to utilize fund balance, and that's okay. We just want to make sure that long-term, we're not ignoring that decision and we're looking at ways to maybe replenish that fund balance. Looking at developing a centralized indirect cost plan. This could be something that could be beneficial for your federal grants, as well as just the interfund transfers. So I spoke to the transfer, between sewer and the general fund. There was about $2 million beyond things that we could identify, say debt service or reimbursement for payroll or operating expenses. So a centralized cost plan would lay out a methodology that you could consistently allocate those costs among departments, and it would be your support for those transfers. The non-uniform pension plan, we didn't know that you guys were going to be here, and I know you're here on the investment side, but CS McKee also does actuarial work. And so, again, just as we heard, I would wholeheartedly agree with meeting with the actuary with Mockenhop on the non-uniform plan and that 8%. We talked a little bit, about sort of what would the change be by going down to 7%. And it would increase the annual required contribution because your liability would increase. But could be reasons that it was at 8%, and again, we're sort of fresh just looking at this, but certainly meet with the actuaries, meet with CS McKee, and find how you can craft that solution, to get to that 7% or 6% to realistically state that pension liability. Procurement policy, I think that there was no formal policy that we were able to get from management. I know that you follow the state thresholds in terms of your bidding and your contracting. This specific recommendation was to comply with the uniform guidance. So just adding in sort of the federal component so that you have one policy that meshes the state and federal thresholds together, so that you don't need to have multiple policies, but just sort of have everything under one umbrella moving forward. The vendor documentation, this is again related to the sort of the federal compliance side. where they want to make sure that you are checking that you're not using suspended or debarred vendors or contractors. So if you're, this is again more important with federal dollars, but it is in some state contracts through DCD and other funding agencies, where you would do a check. There's a state website, a federal website, and you can retain that documentation as proof, you know, that you're not using any suspended or debarred contractors. We did note that for some of the accounts that we had to add, we did note that there was, I think there was 1 or 2 accounts that were closed. So again, those were accounts that were in the city's EIM, but the authorized signers were from, you know, the fire department. So I think there was a plan the last we talked that there was going to be a retroactive sort of review and approval of that, which is good. And then the final recommendation is to develop a year-end closing checklist. This is something that would be specific to working with Terry and finance, just sort of a checklist of items that need done at year-end, both from maybe an internal perspective, but also from an audit perspective, and making sure that all the information is gathered. You know, that'll just help streamline the audit process for future periods. So that's something, again, that we talked about with Terry. We can provide something as a sort of template, and then it can be customized to match up with, you know, the information that we asked for as part of the audit. As far as the pending items, Lisa gave me the representation letter, so that is no longer a pending item. But the last thing would be I need to circle in with Terry. What we'll do is we'll get the DCD login information to be able to prepare that annual financial report for DCD and get that submitted to them as quickly as we can. Questions? I know it was a lot to digest, so, and certainly there's a lot more information in your booklets, but if there aren't no questions right now, certainly if there are questions in the future, I am a phone call away, I'm an email away, we'll get on the phone, you know, we'll meet in person, whatever we need to do to make sure that we can provide you with any information that we have and certainly any guidance as you look to take some of these recommendations.
I have copies of the final report. Oops, sorry. I put a couple here if the public wants them, but we will put this on the website tomorrow. And then I also have packets of the single audit. It's like if you want to sleep, this is great reading. And so, but if you need it explained, you know, I can help answer questions too.
Any questions from the public? Yes, sir.
Kevin Salandra. I was actually a former township supervisor for Santa Township during that period of time of the audit. One of the things that we had questioned then was the transfers from the water and sewage, the proprietary type funds into the general fund, and also the rent that was charged by the general fund to the proprietary funds. Did you look into that, rise to the level of anything that you audited, and did you verify the validity of those transfers and the legality of those transfers, as well as the calculation of the rent?
Yeah, so we did look at the transfers. In terms of what we looked at it for from a financial statement perspective, was that the activity agreed between the funds, that it reconciled. I did bring up, you know, that there was money that was transferred from sewer to water, or I'm sorry, sewer to the general fund. That there didn't seem to be a cost or debt service associated with that. So that's where developing that indirect cost plan or developing some sort of support to substantiate what those transfers were for. But a large part of those transfers were to cover debt service payments that were being paid out of general fund. So, you know, if the general fund is footing the total debt bill, but it's allocated among water and sewer needs to kick in sort of their portion. So that was a large piece of it. And then the second piece is The operating expenditures for water and sewer are recorded in the general fund as opposed to being recorded in water or sewer. So that was something we recommend, trying to record all of that activity within those respective funds so that it would cut down on, possibly the amount of transfers. As far as rent, that I can't speak to, so.
Because they had always told us that they charged rent, and we could never get the calculation as township supervisors, and that would affect the rates being charged to residents of other municipalities.
Sure.
And if there's transfers being done that were in excess of what they should have been, isn't that basically taking ratepayer money and using it instead of to subsidize taxpayer money?
Yeah, I can't speak to the legality of the transfers. I can tell you that the transfers occurred. We did not receive any documentation for, rent. We did ask, and again, unfortunately, with some of the staff not being there, to ask, those questions, we got as much information as we could, to be able to report and give our opinions.
Okay, thank you.
This was a really thorough presentation, audit of the 2023 financials for the city. Is this the same level of audit we'll get for every year? Or
Yeah.
was this an extra ask?
No. So anytime that we provide an audit to a client, especially, given that you're a public entity, you respond to taxpayers, you're accountable to taxpayers, we want to make sure that this information is reviewed with you. We want to make sure that you understand it. We want to make sure that if you have questions, that you reach out to us because we want you to understand it. We don't expect you to be CPAs or auditors or accountants. We're the nerds, but we want to make sure that you understand it, and again, can answer the questions that you're receiving as part of the, serving the public. So this is something that we will do and provide, really as value added as part of why we're here as your audit firm.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, go ahead.
Debbie Meckling, I was just curious why it was a financial audit and not a forensic audit.
We were not engaged to do a forensic audit. I believe Boyer and Ritter was engaged to do a forensic audit.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, and that forensic audit kind of stalled. They can't get the information they need because the FBI has it and the Attorney General has it, and they're not going to release it. So we cannot move forward with forensic audit. We want to, seriously, we really want to, but we can't.
I wondered if that was the reason.
That's they just can't get the information.
Okay.
They took some paper, they took some boxes that we have no copies of.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, based on the presentation, we know that there's training need to be had. Who's going to be responsible for training and to make these changes so that we don't have any issues moving forward?
So, great tee up for a thing later on the agenda, which is again that letter of intent that we'll file with the state. The other thing, not to put too much pressure on her, but Lisa is very experienced at this kind of thing, and so we're hoping to get all this stuff cleaned up before we leave at the end of the year, or the beginning of the new year. Whether that's through partnership with various accountants, including hopefully the DCD's resources, or internally.
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just based off of, you seeing all the information, the money flowing in and out, can you just give an opinion? Is the city financially healthy? Or are we overspending?
I think, again, the recommendations of putting together financial projections along with the budget would help make sure that, we're not only on a path right now where we're maybe at a balanced budget, but that we are also looking a year or two down the road to make sure, do we see a potential funding shortfall? Or do we know that we have some rising expenses that are rising faster than, the revenue that's coming in? So I think the city is stable. I think moving forward, again, having those projections would be helpful for management and council, as you make those big decisions.
That comment, though, is for the city. It's not once a merger takes place. That would have to be reevaluated. Is that correct?
Certainly, when you're adding in a whole nother entity, obviously there's a lot more to look at.
So we could be absorbing debt and problems just as easily as we are giving them.
All of the information related to, the city's finances is in the disclosure. So, there's information out there on the existing debt obligations. So, that would all be public and would be available for everyone to review and factor into the decision making.
Mr. Mayor, may I make a statement?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we are working with the Pennsylvania Economy League to merge both of our chart of accounts, our budgets, and to help work on that 2 to 3 year plan looking forward so that we can make sure that we are, you have proper funding and know what's gonna come as much as we can estimate down the road.
Ron Trasna, just a question on it. You had a lot of dollar value associated with the adjustments at the year end. Was there was there certain big adjustments that took place where did we miss out on that we had to?
So a lot of those adjustments, really the larger ones, were pertinent to the transfers and
Transfer between the funds.
And reconciling, the water, sewer, and the general fund, and making sure that, in the general fund, we're only showing the general fund expenses, and in water, we're showing all of the water's expenses, whether it's operating or debt service, and the same for sewer. Those were the large adjustments.
Were the assets still in each one of the different fundings and that, like the water assets versus the general fund assets? They're not all under the general fund anymore, are they?
No, they are not commingled in the general fund.
Anybody else? Okay, we're going to move on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Had no unfinished business. We're going to move on to new business. Resolution 2025-0401, request to prohibit parking on West Scribner Avenue.
Yes, that resolution was put in play for the short term because of the construction that's being done there. Vehicles coming out of there, we've had a couple complaints that we've had some close calls because
Thanks for hanging in
vehicles
there,
are
guys.
parked on that, vehicles are parked on, which is legal parking now, but it's hard to see out there, especially with bigger equipment. Also, I know on my own park, once we do have the consolidated agency in that one building, there's gonna be a lot of emergency vehicle traffic through there, and I know when we've come out before, you come out of the garage and you come out to that exit, it can be pretty hazardous. As we all know, that road used to be just a one-way, so when you're parking on one side of the street, if there's somebody coming up the other way, you have to sit there and wait on them, or one of the other cars has to wait on the other one. So that was the reasoning behind that resolution.
Is it all of West Scribner?
Just West Scribner to High Street.
About how many spots is that?
It's not designated spots, really.
Yeah, I don't think it's really designated spots, it's just not park, no parking.
4 or 5 cars.
Illegal to park there.
Can I respond to me owning
Absolutely.
a property along
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
Which I am glad somebody took the time to look into property that I own. I do own 3 homes along that road that I rent out. And I have told my tenants from the get-go to please not park on the street. I do provide parking in behind because I know myself it is hard to get through there. I will be make sure that my husband or I try not to park on the street. Sometimes when we're running something into a tenant, I know we do that, so I will make sure we are.
I think that's the library parking lot that I'm speaking of that never gets fed.
Oh.
That's the one I'm talking about.
Okay, we'll make sure I let my husband know. I appreciate that. But I do own the property, so it's clear. I own multiple buildings in Du Bois, so I had already told my tenants not to park on the street there.
So would this just be a temporary thing, just through,
No, we would want that to be extended through because of the fact that there's gonna be a lot of traffic coming out there after the construction's done. And that's gonna be the police department, the Consolidated Police Department, and city offices will be located in there. So coming out of there just to, so it's safer, and there's also ways to maneuver with emergency vehicles through there.
would it make more sense than on the sun, there's two high rises right there. They don't even have enough parking for their employees and their tenants as it is. Anybody that visits, they park down. I know people that park all the way down when they go to church. Because we have 3 churches in that area. Would it make sense to do it Monday through Friday and leave it open on Saturdays and Sundays? So that we're not
I certainly wouldn't have a problem with that.
impeding on
I
church?
think you would have, it'd be less busy, the city wouldn't be open, I wouldn't see whether there'd be a problem with that, and only be a couple hours on Sundays.
And when we have festivals, we're shutting down West Lawn, correct? Where's that parking gonna go?
We're not talking about like High Street. We're talking from
To High
Scrivener
Street.
to High Street, so
But when
probably
we have,
6 or 7 parking spots.
but we also know that when people attend church and festivals in the city, that
Right.
we need everything, because that's what, there's been a complaint about all along. So how do we accommodate the citizens when they need it? And would it be possible to
They-
have
they
just
can-
not park for?
They can use our S&T parking lot for
Yeah, I was
church.
gonna say on Saturdays and Sundays especially, there'd be a lot of parking spots.
Well, they do.
Yeah,
They
they
do. But it flows down through.
Could we amend it to be just no Monday through Friday? With weekends being open?
Yes, you can.
I got something to add.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I understand, emergency vehicles and all that stuff, makes total sense, but when you start down that hill, it doesn't look to me like there's any off-street parking anywhere for those houses down there, so does it make sense to maybe make it one way or something around that? I didn't know if anybody looked at that.
It's been one way before that I remember.
I do too. So is that something that works even a little bit better? I don't want to fix one problem and create another problem.
Right.
Well, that's up to council, that's perfectly fine.
And then the stock.
Yeah, but we take your suggestions serious, that's, we're
I mean,
counting
we're
on
only
you.
talking, what, Mark, you're a member of the church right there, 5 spots?
Probably
Is all we're really talking about, and we've had a parking study done. Shirley, or how are we on parking?
For the downtown, we have adequate parking. The perception is, though, it is not
Convenient.
convenient.
It's always been that.
It's
It's
a
been
convenience
saying
thing.
that for
People
years.
don't walk the
I know.
distance. There's adequate parking for the downtown, it's just not convenient.
Go to any other city, you have to walk quarter of a mile or
Correct.
6 blocks.
Yes.
Right, not here.
But the parking
Yes.
study was done summer of 2023, so it's relatively recent.
I say we go ahead and approve the request to prohibit parking on West Scrivener.
We have a second on that motion? Second, anyone?
I'd like to do it on with the Monday to Friday designation.
I'd say it fails for lack of a second.
Correct. So then he could make his motion.
Yeah, you could.
I'll make the motion that we amend the resolution to prohibit parking on West Scrivener Avenue Monday through Friday.
Second.
Properly moved and second. Any questions on that motion? Anybody have a comment or anything? Anybody on the phone? Jim?
No, I just think there's more we could do versus doing this right now. My comment.
Sure, okay.
Clear, the motion on the floor then is to strike at all times in section 1 and replace it with at all times during Monday through Friday.
Correct.
Correct. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes.
Nay.
Nay, okay, that's fine. Jim's a nay. Resolution 2025-0401.
This is a request of prohibited parking at South Stockdale Street at the intersection of West Long and East Washington, or I'm sorry, East Long and East Washington. For some reason, that one stretch of road doesn't have no parking on this side of the road. And the problem we get into, most of the roads up there do have that, where you're only allowed to park on one side of the road. And most of the time where citizens usually park are parking towards the southbound, which is going down the hill. But we've been having problems in that area with people parking on both sides of the street. You can't even get a regular car through that side. And I know most of that street and other streets in the city, we do have signs on the other side of the road that says no parking this side of the street. So that's the reason for that.
So would it make sense to just make a sign and then?
Yeah, that's what the resolution is.
Oh, okay. I didn't see it was just a sign. I thought it was no parking again.
No parking on this side of the street. Everybody you could park on the other side of the street that's facing going northbound.
Yeah, the definition in the, on the agenda is a little misleading.
So if you're going down Stockdale towards Park, is that, you want it on the right side of the road?
If you were going downhill, you would park downhill.
Everyone's on the left side. Facing downhill.
There's no way you can
Facing
park.
downhill, be on the right side.
There's no way you can park on each side of that street.
Right.
No, so we need to make it on one side. Motion on that?
I'll make a motion to prohibit parking on South Stockdale Street per the resolution.
Second.
2025.
Okay. Properly moving second. Any questions on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Approval of fund transfer.
Well, as we just heard from the auditor, there have been, one of the findings, if you would call it that, had to do with the accounts that are in the city's EIN number, regardless of how that happened or why that happened. The fact is that here today, there are monies that were in an account in the city's EIN that arguably should not have been, or at least going forward should not be. Especially the Mangle Foundation grant funds that did not originate from the city and should in fact be held by the nonprofit corporation. Therefore, one of the first things that Lisa did when we got here was to meet with the fire department and fully understand, coming from her experience as an auditor, she was able to come up with a recommendation, I believe, co-authored between the city and the fire department to transfer certain funds. Now, I understand that some of them already happened, and some of them we're requesting or recommending, I suppose, that are transferred. And those are detailed in the resolution that I drafted for you. Namely, those would be the banquet funds of less than $100, about $100, some general funds, which is donations and allocations in the amount of $5,769.92. A Mangle Foundation grant, I hope I'm saying that right. Mangle?
Mangle.
Okay. For $14,472 for radio upgrades, Mangle Foundation grant for an air compressor for $10,000. Those have already been transferred, and the documentation, although it was done in a work session, it was maybe less, there could be a better definition to it. Therefore, I drafted up this resolution really clearly defining the amounts and to what accounts and such. In addition to that, we are recommending that we allow the fire department to transfer into a bank account of its own EIN the 2024 Mendel grant for 15,000, excuse me, the amount in the budget in the checking account of $30,468.59, which commingles the 15,000 from Mendel grants. A minor amount in a training fund of $113.90, and a parade committee donation checking account in the amount of $50,531.12. Lisa, you're the accountant auditor here, so anything I missed?
I just want to thank the fire department for working with me on this, and I also want to remind them that they cannot transfer any funds or purchase items out of these funds that are in the city's EIN without the proper approval process that the city has to take. So just keeping that in mind going forward with the funds that are still in the EIN that are outside of this.
So I would like to make a motion authorizing the money that has already been transferred and the transfer of the additional funds. As Lisa said, as long as there are no more funds transferred without the proper authorization.
Second.
Properly moved in second. Any questions on the motion? I do. I know there was a work session in 2022, I believe it was, on that. I personally met with many firemen of the fire department. We talked about the money. It was promised to me that it would not be moved. I'm very disappointed that it was. We had an agreement. I understood that, you know, you guys wouldn't move the money. We wouldn't try to take the money, and that you would give us reports of how you spent the money every month. I just want to, say that I'm very disappointed that happened. Okay?
Those were the investment accounts, and those have
No,
not
those were every account.
They were the investment accounts.
They were.
I sat in several meetings with you.
It was every account, the EIN number. Well, we're not going to argue about it. Let's, any other comment on the motion? Vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Nay. I'm a no. Council Bill 1990, a request to authorize the publication of a draft ordinance that would bifurcate, thank you, the Public Works Director and City Engineer position and enable the city to contract with an engineering firm as the city engineer.
So to explain this a little bit further, the city's ordinances go a step further than the state law in terms of whether the engineer of the city has to be a PE as an employee of the city. It also makes the Public Works Director de facto the city engineer. Part of what we passed you passed at a previous joint board meeting was a reorganizational chart whereby the Director of Public Works, namely Scott Farrell, you're the superintendent, would become the Director of Public Works, and then separate that function of the city engineer so that, first of all, in the absence of such a person, then there would still be a Director of Public Works. And then second of all, it would enable us to hire an engineering firm as the city engineer, as many places do. That does not mean that we can't hire a W-2 full-time engineer. It simply would enable us to effectuate an agreement with an engineering firm, which would be particularly helpful in times when there is a vacancy. Like right now, there is no city engineer overall. And so if such a vacancy were to occur in the future, or for that matter, right now, we could fill it rather quickly with an agreement with a PE firm and not have that kind of latency that holds up projects. And so that's why I'm asking for the council to authorize the publication of this draft ordinance. And then you would have your next reading and vote on it at a future meeting. But at this time, I'm asking for you to pass this, authorize the publication so that we can do those two things. Again, separate the Public Works Director and the city engineer so that they can be two separate positions. And then second of all, enable us to hire an engineering firm as the city engineer of record. Any questions?
I'll make the question.
No. No.
Then I'll make the motion that we publish the draft ordinance to bifurcate the Public Works Director and city engineer position and enable the city to contract with an engineering firm as a city engineer.
Second.
Properly moved and second. Any questions on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Passes. Technical assistant request. Request from City Council Joint Board to request with,
Whoops. Sorry for the grammatical error.
yes, technical assistance from DCED.
There's nothing really to add from what was said at the joint board. This is the same request. It's just that the city is the entity that would actually be requesting it at the DCED. Unless there's anything further to ask.
No. I'll make the motion to technical assistance from DCED, letter of intent.
Second.
Properly moved and second. Any questions on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. General public comments. Did you get your, Ms. Clark, did you get your questions answered?
I believe so.
Okay, thanks. I'll cross that off then. Any other comments from the public on anything? Okay, we're gonna move on to council comments. Oh, did you have a question?
Well, do we know when the fire study will be ready?
So we do know that on the 19th, the fire consultant will be giving a preliminary perspective, I suppose, at the joint board meeting. At least that's the current plan. It will not be the final study, but I think it'll be enough of a hint as to where they think that we ought to go that we could start putting some steps in action.
And what's the scope of the study? Does it just determine equipment? Does it make a recommendation on how the money is to come together between Sandy and Du Bois? Like, what all is gonna be included in that?
All of that. I made it clear with the DCED that what we needed was experts to tell us where there is redundant equipment, what equipment is needed, where there might be redundant stations or, you call them companies and stations, yes. And or is there a gap somewhere? What should the legal structure be for the overall department and that sort of thing? And based on my very preliminary conversations with them, it does seem like that is in fact what they're going to do, is eventually make specific recommendations. This is not a real one, but Station X doesn't need to have this engine. However, Station Y should have a brush truck. And Station Z and A could combine under a new building because neither of them are placed very well, or something like that.
And will there be an election of a new fire chief, or will it, how does that occur?
In the new year?
Correct.
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know yet.
When I talked to the two chiefs that were doing the survey, they told me that the decision, the recommendation they're gonna be doing is what, they don't consider us, council, they don't consider the fire department so much. They are making the best decision for the citizens. They said that their call to duty is to do what's best for the citizens, and that's what they're gonna be doing. And that, they've told me that very definitively. Any other public comments? Okay, Shane?
Well, they all had to get back on the road, but I wanted to thank the groups that came and gave presentations tonight for their time and their travel.
Jen?
No, it's just a lot to process.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The audit's quite a chunk of stuff.
Yeah, I have my highlighter and notes, and so I'll have questions.
Elliot?
There's a lot of good work being done by a lot of people in the city, so that's making good progress towards consolidation. So thank you everybody for your efforts, and let's keep moving forward.
Yes.
Yeah, it's working. Okay, I have no comments. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Properly moved second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, Jim.
You were almost like a...